The morning sun cast a soft glow over Carter's Emporium, a charming, family-owned store nestled in the heart of a small town. Its weathered brick facade and neatly painted wooden sign exuded a sense of timelessness. Inside, the store was a tapestry of old-world charm and modern convenience, with polished wooden shelves stocked with everything from fine clothing to handcrafted trinkets. A soft hum of conversation and the gentle chime of the doorbell created a welcoming atmosphere, making it a favorite among locals. Behind the counter stood Lucas, a young man with kind eyes and an easy smile. His neatly combed dark hair and tidy button-down shirt reflected his hard-working nature. Lucas had grown up in the store, learning from his father, Mr. Carter, not just the nuances of running a business, but also the importance of kindness and integrity. Today, Mr. Carter had stepped out for an errand, leaving Lucas to manage the store alone. It was a quiet morning, with the usual flow of familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries and quick purchases. Lucas enjoyed these moments, feeling a sense of pride in helping his father maintain the store's reputation as a pillar of the community. The bell above the door jingled sharply, interrupting his thoughts. In walked Mrs. Evelyn Harris, a woman whose presence was as commanding as her reputation. She swept into the store like a queen entering her court, her fur-lined coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, and her diamond earrings catching the sunlight. Her expression was one of practiced indifference, tinged with an air of superiority that had become her trademark. Lucas straightened his posture, greeting her warmly as he would any customer. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris. How can I assist you today?" She barely glanced at him, her eyes scanning the store with a critical gaze. She muttered, her voice cool and clipped. "I need assistance, and I trust you won't waste my time." Lucas nodded, his demeanor professional and composed, though he could feel the challenge in her tone. He reminded himself of his father's advice: treat everyone with respect, no matter how they treat you. Unbeknownst to Mrs. Harris, Lucas was more than just a clerk, but for now, he was content to simply do his job. Mrs. Harris swept through the aisles of the store, her pointed heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. Her eyes darted over the shelves, a faint curl of disapproval forming on her lips as though the store itself failed to meet her lofty standards. Reaching the counter, she set her leather handbag down with an exaggerated sigh. "Young man," she said curtly, not bothering to look Lucas in the eye, "I need someone to help me immediately. I have neither the time nor the patience to wait." Lucas offered a calm smile. "Of course, Mrs. Harris. What can I assist you with today?" Her eyes flicked to him for the briefest moment, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, for starters," she said, gesturing vaguely, "I need something suitable for an upcoming charity gala. Something refined, tasteful, something you probably wouldn't understand." Lucas nodded, unbothered by her tone. "We have a new collection of evening wear that might interest you. Let me show you." As he stepped out from behind the counter to guide her to the display, Mrs. Harris eyed his modest uniform, her nose wrinkling as though the sight offended her. "Do you always dress like that?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "I suppose it's fine for someone working here, but don't you have any ambition? Surely you don't plan to spend your life folding shirts and dusting shelves." Lucas paused but maintained his polite demeanor. "I'm proud to work here and help run the store. My father and I have built something that serves the community, and that's important to me." Mrs. Harris let out a short, dismissive laugh. "That's all well and good, but let me tell you something, young man. People like me don't settle for important to the community. We aim higher. Perhaps you should consider setting your sights beyond this quaint little shop." Her words stung, but Lucas drew a deep breath and let them roll off him like water on stone. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay composed. Never let someone else's judgment shake your character." "Yes, ma'am," Lucas said evenly, his expression unflinching. "Now, about that evening wear, shall I bring out a few options for you to consider?" Mrs. Harris waved her hand dismissively. "Fine, if you must. But do hurry. I can't waste my time with someone who doesn't understand what quality really means." Though her words cut deeply, Lucas kept his head high, determined to rise above her belittling remarks. It wasn't the first time he'd faced such treatment, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But he also knew who he was, and that was more than enough. Mrs. Harris stood at the counter, inspecting the selection Lucas had carefully presented. She picked up a dress, held it at arm's length, and scoffed. "This fabric feels so pedestrian," she remarked, turning it over in her hands. "Do you not have anything more refined? Or is this the best a place like this can manage?" Lucas remained calm, though her words gnawed at his patience. "That's one of our most popular items, ma'am. Many of our customers have praised its quality and design." "Customers with taste, I'm sure," she replied with a sardonic chuckle, her tone dripping with disdain. "You wouldn't understand the standards required for someone of my social standing." Just as Lucas was about to respond, the bell above the door chimed. The room seemed to shift as Mr. Carter strode in, his presence commanding yet approachable. Dressed in a sharp blazer and with a warm smile, he exuded the quiet authority of a man deeply respected by his community. "Lucas," Mr. Carter called out, his voice filled with pride and affection. "How's it going, son?" Mrs. Harris froze mid-sentence, her head snapping toward the older man. "Son?" she stammered, her eyes darting between Lucas and Mr. Carter. "Yes," Mr. Carter said cheerfully, stepping closer and clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "My boy's been running the store for me today while I was out. Looks like he's doing a fine job." The color drained from Mrs. Harris's face as realization dawned. The young man she had spent the past several minutes berating wasn't just an employee, he was the owner's son and heir. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The store fell silent as other customers who had been quietly browsing paused to watch the scene unfold. A few exchanged knowing glances, smirking at the irony of Mrs. Harris's predicament. "Well, well," Mr. Carter continued, his tone light but with an edge of steel. "I hope Lucas has been able to assist you, Mrs. Harris. He's very capable, takes after his old man." Mrs. Harris forced a strained smile, her earlier arrogance melting into awkward humility. "Oh yes, quite capable," she said hastily. Of course, he's doing an excellent job." Lucas, still composed, nodded politely. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I'll continue helping you find exactly what you need." The tension in the room was palpable, but Lucas remained gracious, refusing to let her previous behavior sour the moment. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harris fumbled with her handbag, clearly eager to end the interaction as quickly as possible. Mr. Carter's warm smile shifted ever so slightly, his gaze settling firmly on Mrs. Harris. Though his tone remained calm, there was a quiet authority in his voice as he addressed her. "Mrs. Harris," he began, folding his hands in front of him. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with my son. I feel it's important to say something." Mrs. Harris froze, her fingers clutching the strap of her handbag. "Oh, I was merely giving feedback," she stammered, her confident demeanor crumbling under his steady gaze. Mr. Carter nodded. "Feedback is always welcome," he said evenly, "but I've always believed that feedback, and interaction in general, should come with respect. It's easy to forget sometimes, but everyone who works here, my son included, contributes to the success of this store. Every role, no matter how small it may seem, is essential." The weight of his words hung in the air. Mrs. Harris flushed, her usual arrogance replaced with visible discomfort. I didn't mean to offend," she said quickly, her voice faltering. "I suppose I wasn't as thoughtful as I should have been." Mr. Carter gave her a small, understanding smile. "I appreciate you saying that. Respect is something we try to practice here every day, regardless of a person's title, appearance, or background. It's part of what makes this community strong." Mrs. Harris looked down, her face a mixture of embarrassment and genuine contrition. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Carter. I'm sorry if my words came across as dismissive. That was not my intention." Lucas, who had been quietly observing, felt a wave of validation wash over him. His father's calm yet firm handling of the situation reminded him why the store and his family was so well regarded in the community. "Thank you for your apology, Mrs. Harris," Lucas said, his voice steady and gracious. "I'm happy to continue assisting you with whatever you need." Mrs. Harris looked at him, her expression softening as she nodded. "Yes, thank you, Lucas. You've been very professional." Though the moment had been tense, Lucas chose to let it pass without lingering on her earlier behavior. His father's words were a powerful reminder that dignity wasn't just in how others treated you, but in how you responded. In the weeks that followed, a noticeable change came over Mrs. Harris. She began to visit Carter's Emporium more often, but her once haughty demeanor had softened. Gone were the sharp critiques and condescending remarks. Instead, she greeted Lucas with a polite smile and engaged the other staff with kindness and respect. "Good morning, Lucas," she said one day, setting a scarf on the counter for purchase. "You've done an excellent job with the display in the front window. It's lovely." Lucas met her gaze, offering a warm smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I appreciate that." The transformation didn't go unnoticed by the other customers. Some exchanged knowing looks, impressed by the humility she now displayed. It became a quiet talking point in the community, a reminder of the lessons she'd learned in the store that day. Meanwhile, Lucas gained even greater respect from the townspeople. His patience and professionalism had left a lasting impression. Regulars commended him for handling the situation with such grace, and even newcomers seemed to sense the warmth and integrity that define the store's atmosphere. One evening, after the last customer had left and the store was quiet again, Lucas and Mr. Carter worked together to close up. They moved through their familiar routine, counting the register, tidying the displays, and locking the doors. As they stood in the soft glow of the store's lights, Lucas leaned against the counter and glanced at his father. "You know," he said, a hint of pride in his voice, "I think Mrs. Harris might actually like us now." Mr. Carter chuckled, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "She does. And more importantly, she respects you, and what this store stands for. That's what really matters." Lucas nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "Thanks for stepping in that day. I wouldn't have handled it as well without everything you've taught me." Mr. Carter smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "You handled it exactly as I hoped you would. You showed her, and everyone else, that dignity and respect are stronger than arrogance." The two stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the store they had built together. The lights reflected off the polished wood and glass, casting a warm glow that felt almost magical. "Ready to call it a day, son?" Mr. Carter asked, reaching for the light switch. "Yeah," Lucas said, his voice steady with contentment. "Let's head home." As the lights dimmed and they stepped out into the cool night, the bond between father and son felt stronger than ever, a testament to the values they shared and the community they served. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. If this story resonated with you or made you think, please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't stop there. Give this video a thumbs up to show your support and share it with your friends and family so they can enjoy it too. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more inspiring stories. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you in the next video.